The State of Crypto is presented by Tron, connecting the world to the power of cryptocurrency.
Joining us for more commentary on regulatory developments is former SEC Enforcement Branch Chief and Bragança law attorney Lisa Bragança. Lisa, it's always great to have you on the show. So a lot to dig in here. I just want to start with there's been a lot of talk in crypto Twitter about the SEC basically being on a rampage, right? Just going after crypto companies. And I'm just curious, there's been so much SEC stuff, it's hard to even keep track of at this point. In your view, what is the most sort of controversial or problematic SEC action over the past, few weeks? Because there's just so many things, but what do you think is the most problematic? Because some of them are more controversial than others.
Yeah, it's hard to pick one. There have been quite a few. I think the fact that the SEC is so skeptical of crypto that things that would be acceptable, conduct that would be acceptable in traditional finance markets is considered by the SEC completely suspect. So that's a real, I think it's just, all of these cases are indicating that, it's kind of framing or what your perspective is when you're looking at the industry as a whole. If you look at it as a suspect group of people from the get-go, then you're going to find fraud, you're going to find violations. Whereas, what came to my mind, just, even in just reviewing the Nishad Singh material is, what about what happened in 2008 when the entire, we had the Great Recession and there was massive wrongdoing in traditional finance? We didn't have any charges there. So that just struck me.
So just to be clear, what you're saying is that, because it seems like what the SEC is being criticized for is largely its approach, right? It's a sort of regulation by enforcement, whack-a-mole. So what should the SEC be doing? Is the idea that basically they should have just had, or not just the SEC, but the US in general, should have had a clearer guidelines or rules for the road before all this happened, as opposed to kind of going after people, after the fact?
I agree that this is regulation by enforcement. The SEC's approach has been that the Howey test applies, that there are clear guidelines going back to the 1940s that, they say all crypto is a security with the exception of a couple. Sometimes they say all the crypto they've seen is a security. But there's still confusion in the marketplace. So what we have is, they keep bringing these cases, and some of these cases are unopposed. So that sort of sets forth what the SEC thinks, but it certainly doesn't get us a view of what the courts think the law is. So that's one issue. And we've heard from industry that folks try to come in and talk with the SEC, and they're not really getting the kind of guidance that they're looking for. And that makes sense. When I was at the SEC, we didn't give advice. We've seen in a CFTC case where somebody went in, got a no action letter, and then got slammed. That no action letter got pulled back. So we really do need a set of guidelines here for crypto. The fact is, we have in the securities, if you look at securities laws, and regulations, there are lots that deal with specific types of securities. There are regulations that deal with bonds. There are regulations that deal with options. There are regulations that deal with, stocks. And they're different. The SEC recognizes they're different. What hasn't happened is there hasn't been a recognition that we need special regulations for crypto.
Yeah, I can imagine that's frustrating considering, crypto firms have been saying we're not getting much guidance, but SEC Chair Gary Gensler has been saying, oh, but you don't pretend like you're not getting guidance. It's been there for 100 years. And you can just, sign up onto our website and register online, et cetera, et cetera.
Right. Where do you put the crypto? I mean, one of the biggest issues, custody. You can't say that we've resolved how to be a custodian for crypto assets. Huge issue. We could definitely use regulations on that.
So what happens? Let's say at some point the SEC says most crypto are securities. First of all, do you think it would happen overnight? Do you think it will be a gradual process because of there might be some sort of economic or financial upheaval for a lot of customers if that were done so quickly? But what happens to the likes of, let's say, a Coinbase or a Kraken or some other U.S.-based entity that trades in crypto, that tries to be on the books and show everything to regulators when they're asked? What happens to them?
Well, as long as they can satisfy the sort of requirements that typically are imposed on an ordinary broker-dealer like Merrill Lynch, they will be fine. But this is a problem because you can't take your crypto and find a custodian that can handle it. I mean, you can't go to the ordinary bank custodians. We know that. The SEC has spoken about that. So how do you do it? What do you do? It's a real dilemma. What we need is guidance that says, okay, here is an asset class that people want to invest in. Here is a way that the SEC considers acceptable for custody of the asset. Without that, we are going to continue to have regulation by enforcement as people try to figure out what would be acceptable. I understand the SEC doesn't like to give guidance right up front, and here's where the SEC sort of, the approach of regulation is kind of in conflict with just how the crypto industry operates. Crypto industry is move fast, break things. It's very cutting edge. Law and the regulatory process is slow. If we go back to the 70s, it took many, many years for index funds to finally get approved. And I think that's the frustration that we have here. It's that regulators move slowly and deliberately, and the industry does not. The industry is cutting edge, fast moving.
Lisa, just want to switch gears for a second. So earlier we were talking about Nishad Singh. He was a former executive at FTX. He's pleading guilty to several charges. Where do you see the potential outcomes out of this, and how do you think it'll impact the trial of Sam Bankman-Fried?
Well, I think that there are going to be three really strong witnesses against Sam Bankman-Fried. And those are our three folks who have reached plea deals with the U.S. Attorney's Office. They, I would expect, have been in from day one. They have been providing absolutely, pivotal information about what Sam Bankman-Fried did and how FTX was set up in its relation with Alameda. They obviously individually, each one of the three, did things that subject them individually to liability. But because of their cooperation, they reasonably would expect that they will get a much reduced sentence. So I think that's important, particularly in a situation where the records that, we had emails or not even emails, I'm sorry, communication set up at FTX and Alameda that auto-deleted. So there's a lot that's been lost. And so these people are incredibly important. You can see the importance of what they've provided. The CFTC complaint describes how Nishad Singh gradually came to learn things. The only way we would that kind of language would come in is based on Nishad Singh talking to the CFTC, the SEC, and DOJ. So there clearly have been proffer sessions. There clearly has been a lot of communication so that the government can get their arms around what's going on.
Does that kind of explain why Nishad Singh's guilty plea comes later than Caroline Ellison's or Gary Wang's?
You know, I agree with what Nick said. I think that it's very likely that Nishad Singh has been talking to the government for about the same amount of time that Ellison and Wang have been, and it's just that it's taken a little bit longer. It could be that it's a little more complicated. His situation. I don't know that they've fully worked out. I've seen different numbers in terms of what the loans were that he took out. Forbes reported some hundreds of millions of dollars of loans that he individually got, whereas the charges that were filed show about 6 million plus another 10 million. So I'm not sure that they might still have been working out the facts.
Mm-hmm. Well, we'll certainly continue to monitor developments in that story. Lisa, thank you so much for weighing in. That was former SEC Enforcement Branch Chief and Bragança law attorney, Lisa Bragança.